morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, the organization of the conference. It's an honor to be here and share a little bit of our views on this matter of the energy transition, and certainly a fascinating time for Guyana. I think a lot of possibilities here. I also thank the Honorable Prime Minister for having summarized my presentation so brilliantly. I think we share a lot of the common views, and perhaps I give a little more details and some of our perspectives on this, but we're thoroughly in agreement. So just for presentation, so John Ingham, I've been working on this for nearly 30 years, about half of that with General Electric. I personally credit myself with about 10 million tons a year of CO2 reduction of projects I've worked on over the years. So with biofuels, with cogeneration, with renewable sources. And currently I run the aeroderivative gas turbine applications for Latin America. And so being involved here in Guyana for about 5 years, working on these projects and looking at possible solutions in the best way to transition into the new future. So my discussion today, I actually divided in 2 parts. So we have a part this afternoon which looks at Guyana more specifically and some of the opportunities that we've seen around the world that can help in this energy transition. We've done this in the past. We've done similar activities in the past. Today, just right now, this morning, I want to talk a little bit more globally and how we see this transitioning happening. So as mentioned by the Honorable Prime Minister, the power sector is an important area in carbon reduction. It does today represent globally about 40%, 41% of carbon reduction, of carbon emissions, sorry. And so it is the main sector which we have to focus on in order to reduce our emissions to a sustainable future. Again, as mentioned previously, we do have 770 million people. I think the number just mentioned earlier was 670 million. But anyway, it's a big number of people who still don't have access to electricity, and especially an affordable and sustainable electricity. So our focus is definitely in the power generation sector. So this is probably a extremely simple chart, but I think it's packed with meaning, and it's packed with a lot of strategy of how we move forward. So in order to proceed in this transition, we do have to look always at the aspects of affordability, of sustainability, and of reliability. So I think most of us were here on Tuesday when we had a power cut, and the reliability that does hurt consumers, it hurts domestic consumers, it hurts commercial consumers and industrial consumers. So that is a key feature. And the difficulty when you move into renewable sources like solar and wind is it's not dependable. You can't say when you want to have it. And so you have to firm that energy somehow and make sure that you have it available all the time. The other obvious aspect is sustainability. So sustainability is key, and that basically means that we are reducing our emissions, even though that this counterintuitive position of going to gas, but at the same time going to a more sustainable future. And certainly what I consider personally the most important aspect is the affordability, right? So it's been my personal view for many years now that poverty is the biggest source of pollution. It is the biggest source of emissions. So whenever in doubt between these 3 aspects, go towards affordability. That will bring development. That will bring sustainability. Okay, this is key, and it's been noticed. I personally have a saying that I always say that nobody is green when you're red. So if you're losing money, you're not going to be green. So it doesn't matter if you go to very sustainable projects that are not affordable. They will fail. They have to be affordable. That's the key message. And I think the opportunity now for Guyana is really to go towards that and to go towards both affordability and sustainability. Gas power, so this counterintuitive movement, which was mentioned in the previous presentation about going to gas, but also at the same time going towards a more sustainable future. Gas power is really seen today as the key factor in moving in that transition. The US power sector reduced its emissions by 33%. Maybe a lot of you don't know, but the US was the largest CO2 reducer over the past 10 years. It was amongst the 5 top countries in reducing CO2 emissions. And 40% of that was actually from gas, just moving towards gas and moving away from coal and moving towards gas, which allows you to bring in more renewable power. And so more and more we see gas as an enabler to more renewable power. I will mention this afternoon, I will talk very briefly about a case in Hawaii. The island of Kauai has the largest solar penetration in the world, and it's only been possible because they have a system which relied on gas. And so they operate today about 5 to 6 hours a day on 100% solar, right? And they can only do that because they have a system that gets there. So I'll talk a little bit about that process. Of course, the abundant natural gas in the world today is a big changing feature. So LNG is available, and of course, Guyana has its own gas now, which will be key to implement that. But the need to be flexible is very important now. So back in the 80s and even the 90s, when a power plant was developed, it was basically developed to be switched on and run flat. Now they're not. They have to follow solar. So when there's not solar, you come on. When there is solar, you come off. And you get things like in California, where they have to put in 15,000 megawatts every day between midday when the sun is up and the evening when the sun is down. So 15,000 megawatts has to be put on the grid and then taken off the next morning. That's just the power generation which you have to follow because of your renewables, right? And the key point, I think, on the top right there is it's the dependable capacity. I always say that gas is the only source of power which you can have where you want and when you want. And this is the difficulty of integrating renewables into the systems, because you don't always have sun, you don't always have wind, you don't always have hydro, as Brazil knows very well. Gas is a fundamental enabler of renewables. And this is the way we work and move forwards. And then I'll just mention very quickly the other ways. Once you have the capacity installed, there are other ways of decarbonization, like carbon capture, like changing fuels to hydrogen or biofuels, right? So over the next 20 years, the world should see a growth mainly in wind and solar. About 75% of new capacity will be from wind and solar. Coal will thankfully be reduced substantially. It's the only source which is actually reduced, but you notice that gas is actually increasing. So gas has to increase in order to enable that solar and wind. It is very hard to be able to have solar without a sustainable gas behind it to afford it. So it's very contradictory that you need more gas in order to have more solar. It's a leveraging, right? So gas, we still see an increase over the next 20 years of about 33% in gas capacity globally. We will see this transition, of course, in Guyana moving to gas, and that will allow for future penetration of more solar. Again, I'll mention this afternoon, I'll give you a spoiler, but this afternoon I'll talk a little bit about our experience in Bahamas. And the solar systems in Bahamas had an expected life of three months. They would burn out just because the grid was so unreliable, it would burn out the system. So all investments into solar power were wasted because of the grid was not stable enough. So that gives you an example of how it is important to have a very firm grid, right? As I mentioned, there are a few technologies that we can look at when we're talking about gas power. And when I say gas power, it's really, it's the combustion of any fuels. And so you can start substituting those fuels. So pre-combustion, so before the machine, we can look at hydrogen, which nowadays is mainly being looked at as a way of storing excess solar power. So you have excess solar power, you can make hydrogen from water, and then you use that hydrogen when you need the power, for instance, at nighttime. So it's, in a way, it's a chemical battery, if you will, and zero emissions. There are other kinds of molecules as well, like renewable methane or even ammonia, and of course biofuels. So I ran a project in Brazil. We did 12 years ago with Petrobras. We ran the first globally ethanol-fired power plant in the world. It was 100% bioethanol, and it was run very successfully in the very turbine that's pictured there in Brazil. And we proved that we can do this with biofuels. And so again, of course, the sugar industry is an important industry in Guyana, and it's a possibility also to use that fuel as a renewable fuel. And that's sugarcane industry, sugarcane ethanol. Then you can move to post-combustion, and of course, all sorts of carbon captures, or basically it's carbon capture, but that depends a lot locally about the resources that you have and how you can implement those that capacity. And it does add on cost a lot. Today, a lot of the push, a lot of the development is really being on pre-combustion, and so looking into fuels like hydrogen fuels. So I think this is an interesting chart that really shows a little bit of the path of how you get to zero emissions. And what I call your attention to is the first step. So the first step from going from coal to gas is a 50% carbon emission reduction, just there. I mean, this is how important gas is. And of course, today the matrix in Guyana is similar to coal. The HFO emissions are similar to coal. They're a little bit shorter than coal, but essentially you're looking at a 50% emission reduction as soon as you move away from HFO to natural gas. So that's the biggest step in this chart. So if nothing else, that's already a 50% reduction, and kudos to Guyana because it's going to be the largest emission reduction in the world, right? So it's a big opportunity to do that. As you move forwards, you can start implementing hydrogen. And again, that hydrogen probably comes from excess solar power, which you can use during the day to generate your hydrogen and use that to offset your carbon emissions. The technology today, there are no gas turbines today that actually burn 100% hydrogen, but this is technology that's being developed. Currently, we actually managed to have a 75% hydrogen substitution. So we do have some smaller gas turbines which actually run in refineries. This has been a common thing in refineries for many years because, of course, when you produce oil, you normally crack the oil, you have excess hydrogen, and what do they do with it? They burn it, right? And so it has been a development which has been very common in power generation for refineries for many years. And we do have, actually, we have gas turbines today, even in Brazil, for instance, where we're burning about 75% hydrogen. That is about the limit that we can do today, but we are rapidly developing these machines that can go to 100% carbon substitution. So the point here is that the path forward requires this infrastructure for you to have renewables. It is the biggest bang for the buck that you can get in terms of carbon emissions. And it is a path forwards that you can continuously improve on this until you achieve your zero emissions. So we believe firmly in this, and I hope that this afternoon I can also show a few more cases where we're looking at this and a few solutions for Guyana, and then, as I mentioned, other places in the world where we've seen this happen, and it's the way forward. So I think the important point is to take the first step. It's to take that first reduction and not be afraid that gas is a fossil fuel. No, that will enable you to move forwards. So we definitely see this as accelerating a low carbon future. And I hope you'll join me this afternoon again, where I'll follow this a little bit more closely here for cases for Guyana. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John.